It arrived on a quiet Sunday morning, tucked inside an ordinary brown box. No card, no return address, just my name printed in bold letters. At first I thought it might have been from the grandchildren. A late Mother's Day surprise. But when I noticed the tiny holes along the sides, something inside me shifted. Then came the sound, a faint rustling, then a hiss, and suddenly nothing felt ordinary anymore. As the officer leaned over the box, I remembered a recent credit card charge Scarlett made. Something about an educational toy. But this wasn't a toy, and what it revealed made me question everything I thought I knew about my own daughter. The morning sun filtered softly through the sheer kitchen curtains, casting gentle lines across the wooden floor. It was Mother's Day. A Sunday like any other. Or at least it should have been. I stood at the sink rinsing out the tea kettle as Thomas shuffled behind me, reaching for the tin of Earl Grey we always kept near the stove. Our routine was simple but comforting. 38 years of mornings like this had taught us to move in quiet harmony, a dance of familiarity and affection that needed no words. I had just set out 2 mugs when the doorbell rang. Thomas glanced up from the stove. Who'd be delivering something this early on a Sunday? I wiped my hands on the dish towel and headed toward the front door. The living room still smelled faintly of last night's apple pie. I opened the door to find a young man in a UPS uniform standing on the porch, holding a medium-sized box and a digital clipboard. "Vivian Carter," he asked. "That's me," I replied, puzzled. He smiled. "Happy Mother's Day." "Someone must think highly of you. Weekend delivery isn't cheap." He handed over the box and turned to leave before I could ask anything else. There was no return address. The label was generic, just my name and address printed in bold black letters. The box itself wasn't heavy. Maybe 2 pounds at most. And about the size of a shoebox. Thomas joined me at the doorway. Strange. Did Scarlett mention sending something? I shook my head. No. We haven't spoken since, he didn't press. We both knew what I meant. That last conversation had left a bruise, the kind that didn't show on skin, but settled somewhere deep in the chest. We brought the package inside and set it on the coffee table. The living room was quiet except for the low hum of the kettle beginning to boil. Thomas poured the water into our mugs and placed one gently in front of me. "Maybe it's from Hazel and Miles," he offered. I tried to smile at the thought. Hazel was 8 now, and Miles 6. It wasn't impossible that they, or someone helping them, might have arranged a surprise. But something about the package unsettled me. Not just the anonymity of it or the early delivery, but something else. A quiet wrongness. I reached for the box, running my fingers lightly across the top. And that's when I saw it. "Thomas," I whispered. "Come look." He leaned in beside me and I pointed to the side panel. Just beneath the shipping tape were a series of small punctures. Tiny holes barely visible unless you knew to look. "Those aren't from wear and tear," I said slowly. "They were made on purpose." Thomas frowned. "They look like breathing holes." I nodded, a chill running down my spine. Exactly what I was thinking. We both sat back in silence, the room suddenly feeling much colder than it had moments before. "That can't be right," he murmured. "Who would send us something alive?" I didn't answer. My stomach was already sinking. Then it happened. A sound. A soft, nearly imperceptible rustling from inside the box. I held my breath, leaning forward. Thomas reached out instinctively, but I caught his arm. "Wait." Another sound followed. A faint hissing. It was subtle at first, like air escaping a tight seal, but then it came again. Longer, sharper, and unmistakably intentional. Thomas looked at me, his face pale. "Vivian!" "What is that?" I didn't respond. I couldn't. We stood together, frozen in place, staring at a plain brown package that now felt like a threat. He backed away, pulling out his phone. His fingers trembled slightly as he dialed. "Yes, we have a suspicious package. Yes, something alive. No return address. It's hissing. I could hear the dispatcher on the other end giving instructions, though I couldn't make out the words. I kept my eyes on the box, half expecting it to move, to shake, to tear itself open. My mind raced through possibilities. Was this a prank? A mistake? Or something far worse? Thomas ended the call. Police are on their way. They told us to stay back, not to touch it. I nodded, still unable to look away. We moved into the kitchen, watching the box from a distance. The kettle had long since gone quiet, our tea forgotten on the table. I sat down slowly, gripping the edge of the chair. I thought about Scarlett, about our last conversation, about the accusation, the entitlement in her voice. She had asked for a portion of her inheritance. Early, as if I were a walking trust fund. When I said no, she had accused me of hoarding, said I was choosing money over family. When she walked out of this house, I felt something crack. Not a clean break, but a splintering, the kind that makes a foundation shift just enough to be dangerous. I had spent years justifying her behavior. The excuses came easily. She's overwhelmed, Benjamin. Pressures her raising kids is hard. The economy's uncertain. But that day, something had changed in her eyes. The love I once knew had twisted into something sharper, cold, calculated. And now this box. Thomas returned from the front hallway. They'll be here any minute. The seconds stretched, long filled with dread. I glanced toward the hallway mirror, catching my own reflection. I looked older than I had last week. It wasn't the wrinkles or the gray hair. It was the realization that someone I had once rocked to sleep, someone I had baked birthday cakes for, might be behind this. Mama Hazel used to call me her little arms wrapping around my waist after dance class. She loved spinning in the living room, pretending to be a ballerina. Her laughter used to fill this house. Miles had once fallen asleep on my chest while I read him bedtime stories. How did we get here? A loud knock jolted me upright. Mrs. Carter. A deep voice called through the door. It's Officer Jennings with the city police. Thomas opened the door and a uniformed officer stepped inside, tall and serious. We received the call about a suspicious package. Can you show me where it is? We led him into the living room. It's on the coffee table, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. The officer approached the box carefully, inspecting the label. He noticed the puncture holes immediately. He crouched beside it and listened. Another hiss. He stood and turned to us. It's definitely alive. We can't be sure what's inside, so I'm going to call in animal control. They'll have the proper tools to handle this safely. Thomas nodded. Officer Jennings stepped back into the hallway to make the call, leaving us alone again with the box. I looked at Thomas. Who would do this? I asked more to myself than to him. He didn't answer. But in my heart, I was already afraid I knew. I sat on the edge of the sofa, my eyes locked on the package, sitting silently on the coffee table. The police officer had stepped outside to wait for animal control, and Thomas stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the driveway as if expecting something more than just a van with a wildlife expert. But I couldn't stop staring at the box. It was the kind of box you'd never look at twice in a post office. Plain brown taped, neatly unremarkable, but now it was the only thing in the room I could see, and somehow it was the only thing I couldn't look away from. My tea had gone cold. The entire morning felt frozen in time, as if we were holding our breath in between heartbeats. And as I sat there, the silence surrounding me, a flood of memories came rushing in, uninvited but relentless. Scarlett wasn't always like this. She used to be gentle. I remember her as a little girl tucking her dolls into bed and giving them tiny kisses on the forehead. She had a soft voice, always asking questions about the world. Curious kind. She used to write me little notes on colored paper, misspelled words, and backwards letters that made me smile even when the days were long and exhausting. Mother, thank you for the cookies. I love you more than my bike. It felt like another life now. The change came slowly. There wasn't one single moment that marked it. It was more like a shift in the air, a slow turning of the tide. After college, she met Benjamin. He was charming in that fast-talking, too slick kind of way. He always had a scheme, a shortcut, an explanation for why things hadn't worked out. But always a promise that the next idea would be the one. At first, I thought he just needed time. Everyone deserves a chance, I told myself. But years passed and the excuses piled up. Job opportunities that fell through investments that didn't pan out, and always a request for just a little help. Scarlett married him anyway, and that was when the calls started coming more frequently. "Mom, our rent is due, and Ben's check is late again. Could you help us out just this once? Mom, Hazel needs new clothes for school." "She's growing so fast. Mom, Miles has allergies. The doctor recommended a special mattress. It's expensive, but we want to do what's best for him. Just this once." That phrase lost its meaning quickly. The worst part was I wanted to help. Not because I believed Benjamin. God knows I stopped believing him years ago. But because I couldn't bear the thought of my grandchildren lacking anything. Thomas warned me. "Viv, we're setting a dangerous precedent. If we keep bailing them out, they'll never learn to stand on their own." I knew he was right. I knew it in my gut. But my heart ached every time I pictured Hazel in shoes that didn't fit, or Miles being embarrassed at school because he couldn't go on the class trip. I told myself we were doing it for the kids. It was always for the kids. That's how it started. Helping with school supplies, buying groceries, paying an overdue utility bill. But then it turned into covering rent, then car insurance, then a down payment on a minivan they swore they needed because Miles was getting too tall for the back seat. They promised to pay us back. They never did. And the worst part, I stopped expecting them to. I started handling things like they were just another monthly expense. I set up automatic transfers to Scarlett's account. It was easier than hearing the desperation in her voice. Easier than pretending to draw boundaries I never had the strength to enforce. But I wasn't naive. I knew it wasn't just about the kids anymore. Scarlett started calling less out of affection, more out of obligation. When she did call, it was usually followed by a pause, a sigh, and a soft lead-in to whatever she needed. A new laptop, extra for unexpected bills. Sometimes I asked for details. Most of the time I didn't, because I already knew. I saw the photos she posted online. Weekend getaways, spa visits, expensive dinners. She didn't look like a woman struggling. She looked like a woman spending someone else's money without consequence. My money. Ours. I looked over at Thomas. He was still at the window, silent. I wondered if he was thinking the same thing I was, that we should have drawn the line long ago, that this box, this moment, might be the cost of our silence all those years. There's a kind of guilt that lives deep in the bones. It doesn't shout. It doesn't cry. It just sits there quietly whispering that maybe all this happened because you let it, because you kept saying yes when you should have said no, because love made you foolish. I remembered the first time Scarlett asked for help after she and Benjamin had moved into their first apartment. It was a small place, nothing fancy. She'd called crying because the hot water heater broke and the landlord wouldn't fix it. We wrote a check for the repairs and sent a plumber over the next day. It felt good to help. It felt like parenting. But this, sitting across from a sealed box that hissed when the room went quiet, this didn't feel like parenting. This felt like punishment. I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to calm the flutter in my heart. Thomas finally turned from the window and sat beside me. He didn't speak, just rested his hand on mine. "You think this is our fault?" I whispered. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I think we tried to do the right thing, again and again. But maybe the right thing became the easy thing." I nodded slowly, and the easy thing became the expected thing. He gave my hand a gentle squeeze. "I don't blame you, Viv. I understand why you did it. But we have to see it clearly now. This," he nodded toward the box, "this is the result of never saying no." I swallowed hard. I knew he was right, but knowing didn't make it hurt any less. Was it my fault that Scarlett turned into someone I didn't recognize? Was it my fault that she felt entitled to everything I had? Was this box a message? A warning? Or just a symptom of something that had been broken for a very long time? Outside, a van pulled into the driveway. The side was marked with the city's wildlife and animal control logo. Thomas stood. That must be them. I didn't move. I kept my eyes on the box, still unmoving on the table. How did we get here, from bedtime stories and ballet recitals to breathing holes in a package and a stranger arriving to help us figure out what danger might be inside? How did we let it go this far? I couldn't say for certain. But one thing I knew. The line we never drew before, it had to be drawn now. Before this went any further. Before we lost ourselves trying to hold on to someone who'd already let us go. It was the Sunday before Mother's Day when Scarlett showed up at our doorstep. I wasn't expecting her. There hadn't been a call, no text, not even one of those vague thinking of you messages she occasionally sent before asking for something. Just the sudden sound of tires crunching over the gravel and the sight of her silver SUV pulling into the driveway. Thomas was pruning the azaleas in the front yard, and I was inside folding a load of laundry when I heard the front door open without a knock. That was her way now. Showing up, walking in as if courtesy was too heavy a burden. She entered the living room, sunglasses still perched on top of her head, and without even a hello said, "Mom, we need to talk." Benjamin followed a step behind her, carrying nothing, saying nothing, but his presence filled the space like smoke, uninvited and thick with tension. I set the towel in my hands down gently and turned to face them. "Is everything all right?" Scarlett exhaled sharply like the question irritated her. "We're fine, but there's something you can help us with." Thomas walked in just behind them, wiping his hands on a rag. His brow furrowed the moment he saw the two of them. He didn't say anything. He rarely did when it came to Scarlett. We'd learned that most of our disagreements lately had Scarlett's name in them, and silence had become his method of staying sane. "We're not here to make a scene," she began. Her voice strained in a way that was clearly rehearsed. "We're just being honest, and honesty's supposed to be good, right?" I waited. Scarlett took a breath, then sat down on the edge of the couch as if her news required physical support. "We've been thinking," she said, brushing a non-existent crumb from her pants. "You've done really well for yourselves. Between Dad's retirement, the savings, the house, there's a good amount of security here." I nodded slowly, unsure where this was going, but already feeling the muscles in my shoulders start to tighten. "And we're not asking for much," she continued. "Just a small portion of what would eventually come to us anyway." I glanced toward Thomas. He didn't react outwardly, but I saw the way his jaw set. Scarlett leaned forward, hands clasped. "I mean, what's the point of waiting until you're gone? That doesn't help anyone. We need the money now, not when we're in our 60s. The room fell quiet. I felt something shift in my chest like a thread pulling too tightly on a worn sweater. It wasn't just the words. It was the cold calculation in her tone, the way she spoke about our lives, our savings, as if we were already half buried. "You're talking about your inheritance," I said softly. She nodded, unashamed. "Yes. A portion of it. Not even half. Just enough to pay off a few things and catch up. Hazel has outgrown her room. Miles needs braces. Basic family stuff." Benjamin finally spoke. "It's not like we're asking for a handout. It's what's going to come to her anyway. We're just accelerating the timeline." Thomas stepped forward now. "That's not how this works. You don't just cash in early like it's a savings bond. We've worked our entire lives to build stability, not to become your emergency fund." Scarlett scoffed. "Dad, come on. You're sitting on more than you could ever use. We're drowning while you're clipping roses and sipping tea, and whose choices led to that?" Thomas replied, his voice low but steady. "Who maxed out credit cards on vacations and vanity projects? Who took out payday loans to cover investments that never existed?" Benjamin raised an eyebrow, but didn't deny it. He never did. He had the look of someone who'd always count on other people to clean up his messes. I wanted to say something comforting, something motherly, but I couldn't find the words. I was stuck somewhere between heartbreak and anger. You could help us, Scarlett pressed. You just won't. There's a difference. I sat down, hands folded tightly in my lap. Scarlett, I've helped you. We've helped you. For years. Then what's a little more? She asked, her voice sharp now. What's so wrong with helping your daughter and grandchildren get a head start? Thomas turned away, running a hand through his hair. Because it's not helping anymore. It's enabling. And then she said it. Her voice dropped to a lower register, quieter but crueler for it. I need the money now, Mom. Not after you die. Time stopped. My breath caught. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. I stared at her, unsure if I'd heard correctly. Scarlett didn't flinch. Benjamin looked away, but not in shame. Just boredom, like this was taking too long. You can't be serious, Thomas muttered. I'm being practical, she replied. You're acting like I asked for your wedding ring or something. She reached for her teacup, and in the tension of the moment, her hand jerked. The cup slipped and shattered on the hardwood floor, sending warm tea and porcelain shards across the rug. Great, she said bitterly. Just perfect. I knelt down without a word, dabbing at the tea with a kitchen towel, but my hands trembled. Not from the spill, but from everything else that was spilling over inside of me. Benjamin didn't move. He stayed seated, arms crossed, watching me clean the mess. Scarlett's tone changed. I guess we should go. Thomas stepped in then. Scarlett. But she cut him off. No, it's fine. We know where we stand. She stood brushing off invisible dust from her clothes. Then, just before walking out the door, she turned to me. Don't expect to see Hazel and Miles anytime soon, she said. You've made your choice. I didn't reply. My throat was too tight. Benjamin followed her out, not even saying goodbye. We watched through the window as they got into the car. Scarlett didn't look back. The engine roared as they reversed out of the driveway, and the silence they left behind was heavier than their words. I sat down again on the couch, the damp tea towel still in my hands. The stain on the rug was already setting in. Thomas joined me, but neither of us spoke. There was something different in her eyes today. Something I hadn't seen before. Not just resentment or anger, but calculation, coldness. Something had shifted, and not in a way I could name. But I could feel it. Something was coming. I just didn't know what yet. The police officer returned just a few minutes later, stepping back into the living room with the practiced calm of someone who had seen all manner of strange situations. His badge caught the light as he approached the coffee table again, crouching beside the box, inspecting it more closely now that he knew what to look for. Officer Lucas Jennings was tall, probably in his early 40s, with a kind face that made him seem more like a neighbor than a cop. But his posture changed the moment he leaned in toward the box. He didn't touch it, just studied the holes, listened. And then there it was again, that hiss. Thomas and I both heard it clearly this time, and I instinctively took a step backward even though the box hadn't moved an inch. The officer stood up, pulling a small radio from his shoulder. Dispatch, this is Jennings. I need animal control at 1840 Crestwood Lane. We have a suspicious package with a live animal inside, a possible reptile unknown species. There was a short crackle on the line before the dispatcher responded. 10-4, sending unit now, ETA 20 minutes. Officer Jennings turned to us. Do either of you have any idea who might have sent this? Thomas opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. His eyes met mine, and for a long moment neither of us said anything. I knew what he was thinking. I was thinking it too. But saying her name, just the act of voicing it, felt like a betrayal I wasn't quite ready for. Instead, I said softly, "No return address." We weren't expecting anything. He nodded, not pushing. We'll know more once animal control gets here. Until then, let's just keep our distance. We sat down at the dining table, the box still in full view from where we were. I wrapped my hands around the mug of cold tea, more for something to hold than any comfort it offered. The air felt tight. I stared at the cardboard like it was watching me back. And then suddenly I remembered, 3 weeks ago. Scarlett had called her voice unusually upbeat. "Hey, Mom, Hazel's birthday's coming up, and I found this really neat educational toy online. It's from one of those STEM stores. Teaches kids about animals and ecosystems. It's not cheap, though. Could I use your card just for this one thing?" I remembered, hesitating, but only briefly. She'd used my card before for one thing, a book order here, a back-to-school jacket there. I always paid it off myself anyway. It felt easier than arguing. I'd said yes. I even remembered the charge when it came through. Reptile Palace. I thought it was a quirky name for a toy store. I didn't ask questions, didn't dig deeper. Now that single moment of trust, or avoidance, sat like a weight on my chest. I looked over at Thomas, but he was already watching me. He didn't need to ask what I'd remembered. The silence between us said enough. 10 minutes later, a white van pulled into our driveway. The lettering on the side read, "Wildlife Services, City of Bridgefield." A man stepped out, lean and tanned, wearing khakis and a navy polo with the city seal. He carried a black case in one hand and a pair of thick gloves tucked into his belt. He introduced himself as Mike Johnson. Calm, professional, Officer Jennings briefed me. "Let's take a look." We followed him back to the living room. He approached the box the way you might approach a sleeping dog. Careful, but not fearful. He put on his gloves, opened the case, and pulled out a pair of long metal tongs. "Let's find out what we're dealing with," he said. He knelt, sliced the tape open with a utility knife, and slowly peeled back the cardboard flaps. What happened next felt surreal. From within the shadows of the box, something moved. Then, gently, almost casually, it emerged. A snake about 3 feet long, its orange and brown scales catching the light as it slowly uncoiled itself. It wasn't aggressive. It didn't lunge. It simply slithered in place, disoriented and exposed. Mike used the tongs to lift it carefully and place it into a secure plastic container lined with air holes. He snapped the lid shut and stood. "Corn snake," he announced. "Non-venomous. Pretty common as pets. Harmless, but definitely not something you want arriving unannounced." I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Still harmless or not the sight of that snake crawling out of a box that had been delivered to my front door on Mother's Day. It shook something loose in me. A fear, a sadness, a realization. Mike looked up. Whoever sent this either doesn't know what they're doing, or they knew exactly what they were doing. Officer Jennings took a step forward. "I'm going to file a report on the incident. Do you have reason to believe this was sent with malicious intent?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to say her name. But I hesitated again. Because once you say it, it becomes real. It crosses a threshold. And I wasn't quite ready for that. Instead, I answered, "I don't know what to believe right now." Jennings gave a slow nod. "We'll include that in the report. If anything else comes to mind, don't hesitate to contact us." Mike secured the container in his van. "Beautiful animal," he said, almost sadly. "Shame it was used like this." When they left, the house fell quiet again. The snake was gone, but the weight it left behind remained. Thomas placed a hand on my back as I stood there, unmoving. My eyes returned to the coffee table, now empty, except for a shallow scratch where the box had rested. A box delivered with no return address. Sent in silence. Opened in fear. It didn't matter that the snake was harmless. It had been sent to frighten, to disturb, to send a message without words. And it worked, because I felt shaken in a way I hadn't felt in years. I sat down, slowly placing a hand over my chest. When did she become this person? The question echoed in my mind louder than any hiss. Scarlett, my daughter. The girl who used to braid my hair on the couch while we watched cartoons. The girl who cried when she lost her favorite stuffed elephant and slept in my bed for a week. When did she become someone who could send a snake in a sealed box to her mother's doorstep? And worse, when did I become someone who wasn't surprised I didn't have an answer? But I knew deep in my bones that whatever came next, this box was only the beginning. The house had gone quiet by evening. After dinner, Thomas retreated to the garage to tinker with the old radio he'd been fixing for weeks, and I was left alone in the living room. The same room where just hours earlier a box had sat hissing on our coffee table holding not just a snake, but something far more terrifying intent. Now the coffee table was wiped clean, but I could still feel the outline of the box like a shadow that wouldn't lift. I looked around trying to find comfort in the ordinary things. Our framed anniversary photo above the fireplace, the worn armchair where Thomas always read the newspaper, the scented candle on the sideboard, I never remembered to light. But everything looked different now, not physically, but in meaning. I walked over to my desk, sat down, and opened my laptop. The screen glowed softly in the dim light. I took a breath, placed my hands on the keyboard, and let them rest there for a moment. For years, I had allowed myself to believe I was helping. That by paying bills, by covering debts, by keeping the peace, I was doing what a good mother does. I had equated sacrifice with love. But now, sitting alone in the quiet, I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to accept before. Love without boundaries isn't love. It's surrender. And I was done surrendering. I opened the banking app first. My password still worked. An old combination of my mother's maiden name and the year Scarlett was born. That in itself told me everything I needed to know. Even in my digital life, I had built access points around my daughter. I clicked into account settings, then navigated to the list of authorized users. There it was. Scarlett L. Carter, still listed on the credit card account I had opened in her name when she was in college. It had been meant for emergencies, groceries, textbooks, gas money. But emergencies had a way of evolving in our family. A bounced rent check, a gym membership that was essential for her mental health, a vacation she swore she'd pay back. I hovered over her name. There was no anger, just clarity. Remove authorized user. Yes. A confirmation box appeared. Are you sure? Yes. A second later, her name disappeared from the list. I closed my eyes. It was like letting go of something I didn't realize I'd been carrying. Not a burden, exactly. More like a weight disguised as a responsibility. And now, it was gone. Next, I opened the autopay section. There were at least half a dozen recurring transfers scheduled, one to a leasing company for her apartment, one to an insurance provider, one to a gym, another to a learning subscription for the kids. I had set them up without thinking twice. One click, one monthly reminder that my role as a provider hadn't ended when she turned 18. I clicked cancel, then again, and again. Each time the system asked me if I was sure, and each time I said yes with more confidence. When I reached the security settings, I stared at the screen a little longer. Change PIN. I entered the old one. Scarlett's birthday. The one she had probably seen me use a dozen times at the grocery store or the pharmacy. Then I entered a new one. 1, 9, 8, 4. The year Thomas and I got married. A year that belonged to us. A moment that meant something before all of this. I changed the passwords next. Bank login, credit card, my cloud storage, all of it. Every time I typed in the new credentials, I felt the shift happening. Slow and steady. A dismantling of access. A reclamation of space. It wasn't done out of spite. It was done out of necessity. A part of me still grieved even as I took these steps. Grieved the daughter I used to know, the closeness we once had, the softness that had turned into sharp edges over the years. But grief is different from guilt, and guilt could no longer be my compass. I sat back, letting my hands fall to my lap. The screen dimmed slightly, as if the computer itself understood it was time to pause. In the doorway, Thomas appeared holding a cup of chamomile tea. He crossed the room quietly and set it down next to me. I didn't look up until I felt his hand on my shoulder. Sure, Chu. he asked gently, his voice low. I nodded. For the first time in years, I said, I feel like I'm in control of my life again. He pulled a chair over and sat beside me, not saying anything more. He didn't need to. The silence between us was warm, not heavy. A silence of understanding, not avoidance. I thought back to the last time I'd said no to Scarlett, really said no. Without guilt, without cushioning it with promises to revisit the issue later. I couldn't remember. But now I had said no, not with words, but with action. And action was something she would understand. Thomas reached for my hand and gave it a light squeeze. We sat like that for a while, letting the soft hum of the refrigerator fill the room. Outside, the porch light flickered on automatically. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked and a car passed by. Life went on, oblivious to the quiet revolutions taking place in living rooms like ours. Then came the sound, a single ping. My phone resting on the counter lit up. I stood slowly, walked over and picked it up. Scarlett! Her name filled the screen. No message, just a call. I looked at Thomas. He looked at me. The call continued to ring, the sound oddly calm, considering the storm I knew was coming on the other end. I didn't answer. Not yet. I stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. Then I turned it face down. I wasn't ready for that conversation, but I was ready for whatever came next. The call came the next morning right after 8. The sun was just beginning to climb above the treetops, and I had barely taken my first sip of coffee when my phone started vibrating on the table. Scarlett's name lit up the screen again, only this time I didn't hesitate. I answered on the third ring. Her voice came through fast, frantic, already in motion before I had a chance to speak. Mom? What did you do? My card isn't working. I tried to get groceries this morning and it got declined right there at the register. I was so embarrassed I held the phone away slightly, the volume of her voice cutting through the quiet of the kitchen. Then I checked the bank and the automatic payment for the car bounced. The gym membership too. What is going on? Did something happen to the account? I waited until she stopped to take a breath. No, I said calmly. Nothing happened to the account. I made some changes. There was a pause just long enough to hear her realize I wasn't confused or surprised. You... what? Her voice dropped slightly, not in volume, but in tone, shifting from panic to disbelief. I removed your access, I said. I stopped the automatic payments, I changed the passwords. The card is no longer linked to you. The line went quiet for a beat. And then the panic returned. You can't just do that without telling me I have bills. I have responsibilities. You don't get to pull the rug out from under me. I took another sip of coffee, letting the warmth settle into me. My hands were steady. I didn't pull the rug out, Scarlett. I've been holding it up for years. You just never noticed. Her breath hitched on the other end. Are you serious right now? After everything I've done for this family, after all the stress I'm under, you decide now is the time to punish me. This isn't punishment, I said. It's accountability. She let out a sharp laugh. Wow, that's rich. You know what this really is? It's about control. It always has been. You love money more than you love your own daughter. There it was, the twist, the reframing, turning it all around, making herself the victim. I didn't rise to it. Instead, I said, Scarlett, I know about the snake. Silence. Complete cold silence. And then, what? What are you talking about? You used my card 3 weeks ago. Reptile Palace. You told me it was a STEM toy for Hazel. But it wasn't. Was it? That's ridiculous, she said too quickly. You think I'd send you a snake on Mother's Day? What kind of person do you think I am? I think, I said slowly, you're someone who thought a message could be sent without words. That fear might do what pleading couldn't. Her breath was shaky now, unsteady and full of heat. I didn't send you anything. This is insane. You're losing it, Mom. No, I said softly. I've found it. She was quiet again. I found my boundaries. I found my voice. And I found out just how far you're willing to go to get what you want." Scarlett's voice lowered. "You think cutting me off is going to fix everything? You think this makes you the hero?" "This isn't about being the hero," I replied. "It's about not being a hostage." She scoffed. "You know what, fine. But don't expect to see Hazel and Miles again. If you're choosing money over family, then don't act surprised when family stops showing up." The words landed like a punch, but they didn't knock the breath out of me the way they used to. "I'm not choosing money," I said, steady as stone. "I'm choosing peace. And if my grandchildren are being used as leverage, then maybe it's safer for them to stay away until you understand what it really means to be a mother." She didn't reply. I imagined her standing in her kitchen or maybe her car clutching the phone with shaking hands, the silence stretching longer than she expected. My calm was the one thing she never knew how to answer. "Scarlett," I added, "I love you. I always will. But I will not continue to help you destroy yourself or us." Still no reply. And then the line went dead. No goodbye. No final word. Just the click of disconnection. I stared at the phone for a long time, the home screen glowing in my hand. She hadn't denied it. Not really. Not the way an innocent person would. She had deflected. She had accused. She had weaponized the children. And then she had disappeared. I set the phone down and turned back to my coffee. It had gone lukewarm, but I drank it anyway. The morning light spilled across the kitchen floor, golden and soft. Thomas walked in, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He looked at me, then at the phone still resting on the table. She called, I nodded. How'd it go? I looked at him. Really looked at him and let out a quiet breath. She knows I know. He didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. Instead, he sat down across from me and poured himself a cup of coffee. We sat in the silence that follows truth. A silence that doesn't ache but settles. There was grief in it, yes, but also relief. She had shown me who she was, and I had finally believed her. The knock on the door wasn't a knock at all. It was pounding, hard, rhythmic, urgent. It startled me enough to spill a bit of the coffee I had just poured. The mug clinked against the counter as I set it down, quickly wiping the edge with a dish rag. Thomas looked up from the breakfast table, his newspaper folded in his lap. "Who would be knocking like that at 7:30 in the morning?" he asked. But I already knew. The pounding came again, followed by the unmistakable voice of Scarlett, raised and full of fury. "Mom, open the door." "What the hell are you doing?" I took a deep breath and walked to the front hallway. From the small window beside the door I could see her. Hair, unbrushed face flushed with anger. Benjamin stood slightly behind her on the porch, arms crossed, jaw tight. His stance was no less aggressive than hers, just quieter, more calculated. They looked like people who had arrived not to talk, but to conquer. "Open the damn door," Scarlett yelled again, her palm slapping the wood now. "I'm your daughter. You can't just ignore me. I didn't reach for the knob." Instead, I stepped closer to the window and slid aside the curtain, just enough for her to see my face. We locked eyes. She kept shouting, "Why are you doing this? You cut me off like I'm nothing. I'm your child. You owe me at least a conversation." I opened the small window beside the door, not the one she could push open, but the one designed for speaking through safely. My voice came out clear and steady. "There's no daughter on my porch this morning." She blinked, stunned, for half a second. Then her eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I said the person I raised, the little girl who used to hold my hand and draw me pictures, would never have sent me a snake in a box, would never threaten to keep her children away like their leverage. That person doesn't live in you anymore. So no, Scarlett, the person on this porch is a stranger." Her mouth opened like she might fire back immediately, but the words caught. Her expression darkened. A shift, subtle but sharp. Then Benjamin stepped forward. "You're making a mistake," he said coldly. "A big one. You think you're in control here, but you're not." I didn't respond. He moved closer to the door, leaning into the glass with an unsettling smirk. We know your schedule. We know what time you go to the store on Tuesdays. We know you walk in the neighborhood around 4. It'd be real easy for something inconvenient to happen. Thomas had walked up behind me by now. He heard the words, heard the tone. He turned and walked away without a word, heading straight for the phone in the kitchen. Scarlett must have seen something shift in my posture because she quickly stepped in between Benjamin and the door, pushing him back with her arm. Enough, she hissed at him. He didn't back away far, just crossed his arms again and glared. I came here for a conversation, Mom, Scarlett said, trying to sound like she was calming down. That's all. You wouldn't pick up the phone. What choice did I have? You had every choice, I said. You could have come with humility, with remorse. But you came with rage, with threats. That's not a conversation. That's coercion. Don't turn this around on me, she snapped. You started this. No, I replied. I ended it. She shook her head in disbelief. I'm your family. You don't get to just walk away. I'm not walking away, I said. I'm drawing a line, and you chose which side to stand on. Just then, we heard the familiar whoop of a siren in the distance. Short, deliberate. A signal that someone was coming. Scarlett turned her head toward the sound. You called the cops on me, she asked, incredulous. No, Thomas said, returning to stand beside me. I called the police on a man who threatened my wife on her own front porch. If that man happened to be your husband, then so be it. You can't be serious, Benjamin growled. Scarlett turned to him. Just stop, she muttered, her voice sharper than before. You're making this worse. The siren faded as a police cruiser pulled into our driveway. The same officer, Lucas Jennings, stepped out calm and professional. He approached the porch slowly, one hand resting lightly near his radio. What seems to be the problem this morning, he asked, eyes moving from Benjamin to Scarlett and then toward me at the window. No problem, Scarlett said quickly. We were just leaving. Officer Jennings raised an eyebrow. Sounded pretty heated to me. We're done here, I said through the glass. Scarlett's jaw clenched. Her hands were fists at her sides. I saw it. How badly she wanted to scream again. But something held her back this time. Maybe the officer, maybe the growing weight of her own actions. She took a step backward. Benjamin followed, but not without turning his head to throw one last glare our way. Officer Jennings watched them descend the steps and waited until they got into the car before turning back to us. Do you want to file a report? He asked. Not yet, Thomas said. But we'd like it documented that a verbal threat was made. The officer nodded, pulling a small notebook from his pocket. Understood. I'll add it to the incident log. Scarlett's SUV started idled, then pulled out of the driveway with a squeal of tires that echoed down the quiet street. When it was gone, I finally opened the front door. Officer Jennings gave us a brief nod. Call again if there's any further contact or threats. You don't have to deal with this alone. We thanked him. He walked back to his cruiser and pulled away. Thomas shut the door gently behind him. I turned and looked at the now empty porch. The wind had knocked one of my potted plants over the dirt, spilling onto the step. I bent to pick it up, brushing the soil back into place. I guess that was the confrontation we always knew would come, Thomas said quietly behind me. I stood and turned to him. If she wants to come back again, I said she'll need to bring her heart, not her fists, not her husband, and not her rage. He nodded once, and we walked back inside. Behind us, the door clicked shut, not in anger but in resolution, and it stayed closed. The next morning was calm in a way that felt unfamiliar. I woke before the alarm sunlight already peeking through the blinds. Thomas was in the kitchen making coffee the way he always did. 2 scoops, just shy of full. He didn't say much as we got ready, but I could feel the quiet strength in his presence, a shared understanding in every glance. We drove into town just after 9, the road still quiet from the slow rhythm of a small weekday morning. The law office of Eleanor Brooks sat on the 3rd floor of an old brick building across from the courthouse. I had been here once before years ago when we first drew up our wills. Back then, everything had felt hopeful, like planning ahead was an act of love. Today, it felt like an act of survival. Eleanor met us in her office with a warm but serious smile. She was in her early 60s, sharp and steady, the kind of woman who made you feel safe just by folding her hands on her desk. Her bookshelf was lined with law volumes and family photos. A vase of fresh tulips sat near the window. "Vivian Thomas," she said as we sat down. "It's good to see you again, though I wish it were under better circumstances." "Thank you for making time on short notice," I said. Eleanor nodded. "You mentioned on the phone that you're ready to make some changes. Tell me what's been going on." I didn't try to soften it. I told her everything. About the years of financial support we had given Scarlett and how it had become a pattern we could no longer sustain. About the box delivered on Mother's Day. About the snake. About the veiled threats from Benjamin on our front porch. About the way our daughter had become someone who weaponized fear and silence and used our grandchildren as bargaining chips. Eleanor listened without interrupting, only occasionally jotting down notes. Her expression was calm, but I could see the concern behind her eyes. "Based on what you've shared," she said when I finished, "we're not dealing with a simple family dispute. This meets the threshold for legal intervention on several levels. Let's start with the most immediate protection, a restraining order." Thomas sat up straighter. "How quickly can that be put in place today?" she said confidently. "We'll file it this morning, and it can be served by the end of the day. It will legally prohibit both Scarlett and Benjamin from contacting you, coming to your home, or threatening you in any form. If they violate it, law enforcement can respond immediately." She opened a new file and began recording details. "We'll document the snake incident, the threatening language on your porch, the financial manipulation, and the history of emotional intimidation. All of this helps establish a pattern. It makes the case stronger." I nodded, breathing a little deeper. Eleanor continued, "The second step is revising your estate plan. You mentioned wanting to ensure Hazel and Miles are still provided for." "Yes," I said, "but not through their parents. I want them to be protected from this. From all of this." She smiled gently. "We can create a dedicated educational trust. It will cover tuition, books, tutoring. Any legitimate educational expense. The funds will be managed by a third-party trustee. Scarlett and Benjamin will have no access, no influence. And if they try to contest it," Thomas asked. "They can't," she said. "Not successfully. We'll build this airtight. You'll include a letter explaining your intentions, your reasons, and your wishes for your grandchildren. It's not only legal. It's compassionate." That word struck something in me. Compassionate. So much of what I had done over the years, I had told myself it was compassionate, kind, loving. But real compassion doesn't mean enabling. It doesn't mean sacrificing your safety or sanity so someone else can continue a pattern of harm. Real compassion sets limits. Eleanor laid out the documents in front of us. "These are the updates to your will, the new trust documents, and the initial restraining order forms. We'll file the restraining order today, and the estate revisions will be finalized within the week." I picked up the pen. My hand didn't tremble. I signed the first page, then the next, and the next. Each signature felt like the closing of a chapter that had dragged on far too long. Thomas signed alongside me, his presence steady, unwavering. When we were done, Eleanor gathered the papers and placed them in a neat folder. "You've done something very difficult today," she said softly, "but also very necessary. You're protecting your peace, your marriage, and your future, and you're still providing for your grandchildren in a way that honors them and you." I nodded, the weight of her words settling over me like a blanket. Not heavy, but warm, grounding. "There's one more thing," she added. "Keep documenting everything. Any attempt at contact, any messages, calls, or in-person encounters. Keep a record. If there's another violation, it strengthens your position and allows us to act faster." "We will," Thomas said. "We've already started." Eleanor stood and shook our hands. "You're doing the right thing." As we walked out into the sunlight, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Stillness, not numbness, not shock, just stillness, like the noise had finally quieted. Thomas squeezed my hand as we reached the car. "You okay?" he asked. I looked up at the sky, clear and blue and wide. "I think so," I said. "For the first time in decades. I think I actually am." And I meant it. For 30 years we had moved from one crisis to the next, one request, one favor, one emergency after another, always trying to be kind, always trying to fix what wasn't ours to fix. But this time kindness looked different. It looked like signing papers. It looked like saying no. It looked like putting a lock on the door, not just to keep others out, but to keep ourselves safe inside. We drove home in silence. Not a tense silence, but a shared one. A silence that said we did something hard today. We drew the line, we chose peace, and for once the silence didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like freedom. 2 days passed, and with each one the silence grew deeper and stranger. Not eerie or ominous, not like the hush before a storm. This silence was still, clean, almost sacred. No calls, no texts, no emails about emergencies that weren't emergencies. No passive-aggressive voicemails laced with guilt. No midnight panic requests for money transfers. No fake sweetness masking manipulation. Just silence. For the first time in what felt like years, Thomas and I woke up with no dread curling in our stomachs. There was no urgent need to check the phone, no knot of anxiety waiting in my chest. The air in the house felt lighter, as though someone had opened every window and let years of accumulated tension drift out with the breeze. That morning I found Thomas already dressed and setting 2 travel mugs on the counter. "Let's go grocery shopping early," he said with a smile. "Beat the weekend rush." I laughed. I couldn't remember the last time we'd gone to the store together without being interrupted halfway through. One of us usually had to leave early to take a call or handle some urgent situation involving Scarlett. A bounced check. A missed deadline. A school form she forgot to fill out and needed scanned and sent ASAP. But this morning, there was nothing. We strolled the aisles slowly, picking fresh vegetables, restocking spices, even spending time in the bakery section, deciding between sourdough or honey oat. It felt like a date. Not a flashy kind, but the kind only 2 people who've spent decades together would enjoy. Peaceful, familiar, full of tiny moments of connection. We came home and made sandwiches for lunch. He read the paper while I clipped coupons, not because we needed to, but because I liked the feeling of keeping our lives simple and in order. No one asked us for anything. No guilt, no manipulation, no obligations dressed up as family. The house stayed quiet. That afternoon the phone rang. It was Officer Jennings. "Mrs. Carter," he said. "Just wanted to let you know the restraining order was officially served this morning. Both Scarlett and Mr. Carter received it directly. It's on the record now." I paused, letting that truth settle in. "Thank you," I said. "Really, thank you." "Of course," he replied. "And please remember, if there's any contact, any violation at all, don't hesitate to call us. We're here to support you." I hung up and stood in the center of the kitchen for a moment, holding the phone loosely in my hand. Served. It was official. This boundary we had talked about, agonized over, finally existed outside of emotion or theory. It was no longer just a quiet resolve or a late-night conversation whispered in bed. It was law. It was protection. It was real. Thomas walked in, drying his hands on a dish towel. "Everything all right?" I looked at him and nodded. "Yes, they've been served." He set the towel down slowly. "Then it's done." I didn't say anything right away. Just nodded again and felt the words echo in my chest. Then it's done. That evening we sat on the porch. The sun was setting low across the backyard, casting golden streaks over the grass. The hydrangeas were starting to bloom again. Soft, round bursts of lavender and blue. I rocked gently in my chair, the creaking wood matching the rhythm of Thomas flipping pages in his book beside me. I looked out at the yard and thought about Hazel and Miles. They would be all right. The trust had been set up with strict guidelines, and the money was protected. Scarlett couldn't touch it. She couldn't spend it on spa packages or new handbags or pay off another one of Benjamin's short-term business loans. The money was for the kids, school books, tutors, even college. Every dime would be tracked, and it would only go to them. That decision, more than any other, felt like reclaiming a part of myself, a part of being their grandmother. I would not allow their future to be bargained with again. And though I may not be able to hug them whenever I wanted or hear their voices on the phone at bedtime, I knew that what we had done was an act of love. Quiet, long-term, steady love, the kind they might not understand today. But maybe one day they would. I sighed and looked up at the clouds, soft and slow-moving. We lose so much in the mess of family, time, energy, sometimes even ourselves. And once those things are gone, we can't get them back. I'd spent too long trying to fix what wasn't mine to fix, trying to hold together a relationship with someone who saw me not as a mother but as a bank. And I had let her. But not anymore. I looked over at Thomas, who had set his book down and was sipping his tea, his eyes on the horizon. He felt it too. The stillness, the healing, the fragile but powerful relief that comes when you finally say, no more. Maybe we couldn't reclaim the years lost to enabling and guilt. Maybe we couldn't rewrite the arguments or undo the years of silence wrapped in obligation. But we could protect what came next. We could protect the years we still had. And I intended to. I reached out and took Thomas's hand. He looked over at me with a gentle smile, like he already knew what I was thinking. No one can give us back the time we've lost, I said quietly. But we can protect the time that's left. He nodded, squeezing my fingers. And in that moment, with the sun fading behind the trees and the house quiet behind us, I knew we had finally stepped into a new chapter. One not written by guilt, but by choice. The email came late on a Wednesday evening. I was getting ready for bed, folding back the covers and turning off the light on my nightstand when I noticed the notification on my tablet screen. The subject line was simple. From Scarlett, subject, "Please read Mom." I hesitated. Part of me didn't want to open it. Not because I feared what she would say, but because I already knew. Still, something inside me said to read it. Not for her, but for closure. I tapped the screen. The message was long. Longer than anything she'd written to me in years. It started soft, full of all the right words. She said she missed me. Said the kids asked about me. Said she was sorry for how things unfolded, though the words didn't land like an apology. More like a clever dodge. She recounted memories from her childhood. Baking cookies together, reading in the armchair the dress I had made her for the 5th grade recital. I could almost see the small version of her in those moments, but it felt distant, like watching someone else's daughter in an old home video. Then came the pivot. She said the changes I'd made had shaken her, that it forced her to reevaluate her choices. She talked about growth and needing support, and how she was finally ready to be different. And just when I thought she might truly be reaching for reconciliation, the last paragraph undid it all. If you can give me access again, just temporarily, I promise this time will be different. There it was. The same request wrapped in new paper, a familiar tune with rewritten lyrics. It didn't matter how many metaphors she used or how much she layered it with emotional memory. The truth hadn't changed. She hadn't changed. She still wanted control. Still believed love meant saying yes. Still thought she could twist pain into leverage. I didn't respond. I closed the tablet, powered it off completely, and placed it inside the drawer. That was where it belonged now. Not in my heart. Not in my inbox. Out of sight. Out of reach. The next morning, I made tea. Not out of routine, but out of peace. There's a difference. I stood by the kitchen counter, watching the water begin to boil, and pulled out a drawer where I kept a small bundle of stationery. Cream-colored paper. A matching envelope. The kind of paper meant for words that mattered. I sat at the kitchen table, took a deep breath, and began to write. The ink flowed slowly, my hand careful and deliberate. Dear Hazel and Miles, if one day you wonder why your grandmother isn't around, why she stopped coming to your birthdays, or picking you up from school, or singing lullabies at bedtime, I want you to know something true. It was never because I stopped loving you. It was because I had to teach your mother two things I had once forgotten myself: self-respect and boundaries. I tried for years to help in ways that I thought were love. But help without limits becomes harm. And love without honesty becomes silence. I had been silent for too long. Sometimes love looks like showing up with a gift. Other times love looks like stepping away so that pain doesn't keep growing between people who are supposed to care for each other. I still love you. I always will. From far away, from quietly, from a place of peace that I hope one day you'll understand. With all my heart, Grandma Vivian. I folded the letter, placed it in the envelope, and wrote their names on the front. I didn't mail it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was written, and it would be here if they came looking. By mid-morning, the sun had poured across the dining room floor, stretching itself over the hardwood and soaking into the curtains. I carried the teapot into the living room where Thomas sat reading the paper by the window. He looked up, smiled, and moved his cup closer. I poured the tea and sat beside him. We didn't speak for a few moments, just listened to the quiet sound of birds outside the window and the creak of the old house settling in the morning. After a while, he looked over and said, "You didn't write her back." I shook my head. There was nothing new to answer. Just an old request dressed up like a confession. He nodded, not surprised. "She'll keep trying," he said. Maybe I answered. "But I won't." He studied me for a second, then leaned back in his chair. "You look lighter." I smiled. "I feel lighter." Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees. The world felt soft again, not sharp like it had been for so many years. The house didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It felt like a home. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for the next shoe to drop. I wasn't tiptoeing around someone else's anger or measuring my words for fear of causing an outburst. I wasn't calculating how much I could give without crumbling. I was just here. My eyes drifted toward the shelf near the fireplace. On it sat an old family photo, Scarlett at 10, standing between Thomas and me, her smile wide and real. I didn't reach for it. I just looked. That version of her still lived in my memory. But now I understood she might never return. And that was okay, because loving someone doesn't mean letting them hurt you forever. Loving someone sometimes means stepping out of the way and letting them face their own reflection, even if they never look. Thomas set down his cup and reached for my hand. So he said softly, "How does this Mother's Day feel?" I looked at the light pouring in from the window. It glowed across the table, casting golden lines across our hands, the steam from the tea rising slowly between us. For the first time in years, I whispered, "Mother's Day isn't about a gift to unwrap. It's about the freedom to live." And I meant it, every word. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever felt torn between love and self-respect, or struggled with setting boundaries with the people closest to your heart, know that you're not alone. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to protect your peace, even when it broke your heart? What would you say to your child if love turned into a silent sacrifice? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your story in the comments below, because your voice might be the one that comforts someone else. And if you found this story meaningful, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next powerful journey. Thank you for watching.